Oops. There we go. How's that? That is bright. How you doing, folks? Hopefully this won't break the damn thing. Last night it broke the thing. Wanted to just test this, and hopefully someone will help me make sure that you can hear me first and foremost. And as you see, I got some Star Trek in there on my background. Do 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 do. Looking for anybody? Do do do. Yep. So just hopefully someone will pop on. Excuse me, pop on in and tell me if this thing is working or not. Um, just got it today. I think I got it set up, but you never know until somebody verifies for you. So, um, got the Star Trek up because I wanted to do a little Star Trek show, but I've come to what should have been maybe an obvious conclusion, um, and that is if you don't tell people ahead of time, they don't come. So I wanted to talk about this a week ahead of time, and plan for it. The Star Trek thing. I had somebody give me a Star Trek game, Rules Light, and that's cool. I've been pushing Rules Light. I've been a little bit contradictory. Here's the thing: I don't, you know, I want to play, and I can't get people to lay off the everything's got to be ultra simplistic thing. So I tried to went to the Rules Light talk a little bit, and it was weird. I got a lot of pushback, and well, you got to have rules and all that. Which way is it? So, uh, at the same time, playing something from the '80s, these things, they had a lot of people act like they were ultra complicated, and they really weren't. Um, so anyway, what I wanted to do is I want to take Star Trek. God, I always get this name wrong 'cause it's so big, but Star Trek Combat Tactical Combat Simulator, made by FASA in 1987. Hard to say, fun to play. Uh, it was a hilariously, it was a way to play Starfleet battles without having to learn Starfleet battles, which was a somewhat extensive game. And I played it last year with a friend of mine, a player that played in a lot of my campaigns, and it wasn't a complex thing to learn. It was hard to learn because the rules weren't written very well. But once we worked our way through the poorly structured sentences and we played it once or twice, it it got real easy. So what I'd like to do next week with the Star Trek is sit down with the free rules that I got from one of my followers that are rules light, and look at them compared to the Star Trek combat simulator thing, which I believe was like 85, 86, 87, somewhere in there, and compare them. And let's really see what is it in these older games that people go, see, that's too much. So and discuss uh, why, at least in my opinion, maybe going to the lighter might be an easier burden as far as learning curve, but it actually turns out to be less satisfying gameplay. I talked about it earlier today too. Epic gameplay, just generally larger, deep games. I don't know why these aren't more appealing. Uh, Why, they did it with wargaming. Well, we can't play something that big. It's too hard to play. There's too much complexity or whatever. So you got to play skirmish. That's the only thing that can be done in a reasonable amount of time. But I didn't really see the fun in narrowing things down to here's you and 3 guys storming a machine gun pit, and we're going to play that out for 3 hours or more on a Saturday afternoon. It really doesn't have any context within the conflict you're simulating. You don't really feel like you've accomplished anything. When you played stuff in the 80s that was supposedly so complicated, you were, maybe taking Remagen Bridge. The end of the game had you accomplishing something. You had some influence within uh, the historical context. So I like a little bit of a wider breadth on these games. And they really don't have to be so complicated that you can't play them or take that much time. When you tackle something that's a little bit bigger, you usually get into it with the knowledge that it's not going to be a sitcom length game. That we didn't sit down and buy Europa and say, well, gee, this is just too much because we can't finish it in a day. Europa was if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, Europa was a very large monster war game, and it required a little bit more time. And we understood that. And we wanted to play it, so we bought it knowing that, yeah, this isn't going to happen right away. So if you're going to do something like the living campaigns that I've been talking about for a long time, but not very many people get to hear it because I have a hard time reaching other folks, or listening to somebody like Alex, and I'm going to say the Archon is the screen name. Macris? I'm sorry if I got his name wrong. The Axe guy. Sorry, that's not a very flattering. I suddenly failed on his last name, but he's a very sharp gentleman, and he's big into the living campaigns and the larger systems, and I think they're very doable, and they're much more interesting than having to narrow your focus to here's a half a day's worth of play because anything else gets to be too much. The whole living campaign is playing on a continent or a planet where everything is going on all the time. This is sometimes confused with certain sects of that's sect, SECTS. Watch me spell that wrong. That talk about real time. And I'm not talking about real time. I'm just talking about the idea that everything within your continent or your world, even if it's not a continent, a county, whatever, is all going on at the same time as you're playing. The best way to do that is to have a chunk of time like a turn or a phase, if you want to use. People use different phraseology for the same thing. But break the day up into, say, 4 6-hour turns or something like that. And that way you can have everything going on at the same time, even if it's not within the perception or immediate area of your players. And it generates a whole lot of scenarios and very interesting interaction with the game. This is one of these things that if you have more players, it works out even better. One of the other things that came up today was, what's the optimum party size for an RPG? And of course, everybody, because it's been repeated for many years now, well, anything beyond 4 to 6 becomes unwieldy and too complicated and takes forever, and you can't handle all that and all that sort of thing. And you can. You can if you have everybody who's willing to work with you on it. I played one, it kind of got panned because it wasn't mine. Well, I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but I played it on Discord, and it didn't work well because Discord couldn't handle 15 people in its server. Now, that doesn't mean my game was bad. That's just people blamed me. But I used the platform that I could, that everybody agreed upon. It didn't really function that well. But otherwise, beyond the technical issues, it worked real great having that many people. And it made an expansive, interesting scenario where there was just more than here's a handful of people that somehow became friends or business partners walking around smashing everything that is big, mean, and ugly and taking its gold. You're just mugging monsters in a lot of these games because anything more than that is, too complicated or whatever. But imagine where you have geopolitical things and uh, intrigue and politics and stuff like that. I've seen people mock it. I don't quite understand why they kind of speak to it in a derisive manner, like, "Well, we don't want to play Game of Thrones." Why not? Why wouldn't you want to live inside a living world? Well, thank you for checking my mic. I've been talking for 10 minutes, just hoping I wasn't talking to myself, but appreciate it. Yeah, just got this new. So I was just talking about some of the living campaigns in larger worlds, putting things together. In fact, we were talking about that a little bit with the war game you were mentioning, where you had a little bit of role playing and a little bit of war gaming. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about right now. I think that's a real fun concept that can be done with a lot of different IPs and just stuff you make up. I was making up a world where I wanted to have that done. It's more interesting to have that, I think. There's a lot of different things that can go on. I was playing a Star Wars one where it wasn't just 5 people doing a role playing scenario. The entire war was going on in it, the war between the Empire and the rebels. And that wasn't just it. There was also all the criminal activity, smugglers and so on. So all these different factions making interrelated deals or having conflicts with one another, and a group of RPG folks that had to kind of navigate all that. It had a lot of interesting intrigue and back and forth. And when you add in the war gaming, then you have people that can play on that side. That's what some people refer to as patron play, if I understand it right. I don't always keep up with all these jargon terms. They're ever evolving and hard to understand, but I believe that's what some people call patron play. And that's just, here's somebody who's not directly part of the RPG thing. They're basically playing, kind of a weird way to say it, sounds contradictory, but playing an NPC. They're playing commanders of military forces, at least in the case of what I was doing. And they were fighting each other in a war game type situation. But that was occurring in the same world at the same time as the RPG players were doing their stuff. And sometimes they cross paths and sometimes they wouldn't. But they would, both the RPG and the war game would affect one another. You may not be able to travel to a planet because there's a significant battle going on right now, or the Empire is blockading it, or something like that, or blockading the route to it. So, and then there might be a situation like what happened at one point where the RPG group was sent in to deliver proton torpedoes to an insurgent rebellion group and significantly increased their firepower. And the Imperials were coming to fight them, had intelligence that, these are fairly poorly armed rabble that won't be a problem to rout. And when they got there, they had starfighters that had some pretty nasty punch to them with the torpedoes, and they were taken aback by that. So it was, and it did more damage to the Imperial war effort and all that. So you can have stuff like that going on in these games. D&D is the same thing, just adding in kind of a geopolitical element uh, and making sure that everybody in the realm is capable of being part of the storyline instead of just some backdrop or uh, at best an NPC that relays a couple of pieces of information. That's it. Have everybody doing something all the time and have all of that interrelated. Like the fantasy world we made, there's trade agreements. There's very specific things going on in each um, country that sometimes affect the countries around them, generate tension and conflict and things like that. Um, and that builds scenarios and uh, an interesting backdrop to play in, as opposed to just here's something in a dungeon, go get it for the king, and we'll give you money. And you know, some of this stuff seems to be kind of cookie cutter these days. No matter what system, people are real interested in playing special systems and what kind of rules will do these sort of things and all that. But when it comes down to the adventures themselves, they all start to kind of sound the same, at least the ones that I've been exposed to. So uh, it really becomes a generator of content in its own right. Instead of having to make everything up every time, if you've got a world that's just work, even if you're not playing with a group and you keep this thing going, it's a machine to make material that you can use with a group when they do get involved. And getting more than one group involved uh, is really a lot of fun. I understand it's hard to find one group in a lot of cases, but if you can get one or two parties beyond the initial party going, that really is a grand thing to do. Um, I think it just opened up a lot of ideas. And I think some of the reason that there's people always making a new fantasy system or whatever is because there's just an itch that isn't being scratched. Everybody's trying to, I want to get this one and that one, and they keep buying another one because I don't think everything's firing for them. They're still searching for something. And I think that something may be hidden behind the, oh, you can't possibly play that way because it's too complicated and takes too much time. If people would shed that and at least take a bite out of these bigger, more grandiose ideas, you'd find yourself uh, playing some really awesome, epic, long-term games. If you're familiar with the Brosers, you likely don't care for them very much because of the way that they conduct themselves on the internet. Or maybe you don't give a shit. I don't know. Some of them may not be complete jerks. Other ones, whatever. I don't really want to sit around and badmouth people, but they tend to have a bad reputation. And I bring that up because I tell people a lot of what they say game wise really isn't that bad of an idea and should be embraced and looked at, even if you feel that these guys are jerks. I've seen people go, I don't want to hear anything about what they do because I hate them. I haven't had a good experience with them either. Nonetheless, the idea of a large kind of war game on top of an RPG is really an interesting deal. And their real time thing is nonsense. I'm not into that. It doesn't work. But having a like the latest one that came up, I saw them come up with an insurgency inside a kingdom. I'm doing something like that. I already had done something like that. But it's real interesting. You're basically gun runner or weapon runners because there's no guns, but you're delivering weapons to insurgents within a kingdom that is having internal conflicts and such. So brings out some really interesting scenarios. But it's always kind of scoffed at. But what I'd really like to do is hear from people and say, well, what is it that makes something like that unplayable for you? Where's the, well, first of all, you have to say, well, I'd like to do it, but it's you can't do it because it's too much. If it's something that doesn't appeal to you, then don't. You can argue against it all day long. It's another problem with conversations on the internet. There's people that have no intention of doing what you're doing, but they'll act like they want you to sell it to them. What they really want is a long-term argument or debate. So if you looked at something like that and said, yeah, it sounds like fun, but it's just too much trouble. Where's the too much trouble part? Because I think we can smooth it out, can give you some ideas. So, um, but it's all about 4 to 6 people doing one little thing and nothing else because anything more is a heavy lift. You know, we used to play with 10 people, uh, at least 8 or 9. Some guys couldn't make it, but we had a group that was 10 people at one point, and it was fun. You could, you didn't have to worry about balance as much. If you were first level, you could still go play something that maybe was 3 or 4 level because there was almost a dozen of you. You wouldn't have to worry about being swamped by something. Um, the more people you got, like in AD&D or even regular original D&D, you get experience based on the level versus you. So if you kill something that's above your level, you get more experience for it. So if you've got 10 people, you might be able to take down that monster that you wouldn't be able to with 4 or 6 people, and you'll end up all elevating yourselves faster. Now, the downside is for the greedy people, I say that in jest, but the cut of the treasure becomes smaller the more people you got, but that's compensated by being elevated and experienced faster and being able to take on things that might have a little bit more coin in their stash and live through it. So that's one benefit to it. Plus, it's just groups are fun. If you're into the social element, what's wrong with more social interaction? Some people say, well, the problem is that there'll be people that won't ever get a chance to talk or anything like that. It's hard to go around the room and get role playing and discussion out of 10 people. I guess that depends on the player. The other thing is I've played with the people who, oh, you can't have more than that. I don't even want to play if you got more than that. It's too much and all this sort of stuff. Well, A, you're a player. Why do you care how many other players you're playing with? You're not the DM. 2, I've played with people who won't say boo if there's 3 in a group or 4 in a group. Sometimes I've got to coax words out of people. Of course, there's the flip side too. There's people who will never shut up and they just run over everybody else, and that's another problem. But those kinds of issues, that's not a game system issue. That's not a game philosophy issue. Those kind of things usually get poured into, well, it's too complex a system. No, if you got somebody who's mucking it up by the way that they're playing or the way that they conduct themselves on the table, that's their fault, not the game. And getting people that are all on the same level, as far as being extroverts and role playing, that's difficult to do in any situation. Well, there's a lot of crosstalk here again. If you've got somebody who likes to try to command the room, I've had a guy where I've had to tell him, please let other people talk a little bit at the table when there was only 3 or 4. It's real simple to handle a large group simply by having a list of their names, whether screen names or character names or whatever, and explain what's happening, and then go down the list. Okay, Bob, what do you do? Tom, what do you do? Dick, what do you do? Harry, what do you do? It's real simple. You just got to be able to maintain some control. And people argue, well, you can't do that with a big group. Let's change the English. And no offense, you can't do that with a big group. And that's okay. If you want to do it with a big group, you can learn how to do it, even if you right now it didn't work out well for you. But that was the thing I said earlier today too. There's a lot of people who say I did it and it didn't work, so it can't be done. Eh, that's not really true. Um, and with a little bit of preparation, with a little bit of thinking it through, you can get it done if you want to get it done. So a lot of times it's too complicated or unplayable just means I don't want to play it. And I never understand why people just won't say that instead of constructing some straw man about how it's no good. Um, so, but I really look forward to playing something that has the kind of epic, you know, like I got a Greyhawk thing right now. Now, the lead in is your fairly common. I think I got 5 people, and they're going through a little story and the places they go. There's events, and then, but as they go down that path a little bit, it will become the kind of epic game that I like to do. Um, I'd love to have a second party in there that would only accelerate that process. So I just what I've got them doing is just kind of start wading into the shallow end of the pool, and then eventually we'll carry them down to the deep end, and they'll get submersed in a much deeper and um, there'll be warfare and politics to think of and things like that. I think it captures the imagination, but it is a matter of preference. Um, I talk to some of the players and they say, I like this. I don't, I like this deep, detailed world to work in. Good. Because I do too. I think it gives you an idea. So anyway, but uh, this is to the point where I've kind of made my pitch. If there's anybody out there, I see a couple of listeners, go ahead and speak up and, give me your 2 cents worth. Do you agree, disagree, questions, comments, criticisms? I work better when I've got a crowd that I can talk to. I'm not much of a standing behind a pulpit and preaching really isn't my forte. Um, I'll end up repeating myself because I'm old. Anything? Anybody? Bueller? No? I'm gonna try. There's like a 7 or 10 second delay or something. So just one Mississippi. Nope. Okay. So I guess I guess I covered the Star Trek thing. I'd like to. Uh, the next thing is my Star Wars, which is domain play. Kind of show you how that goes. What happened with that is I'd been playing it for a while, and I did have a large domain situation being played. But people have jobs, and they're not all 9 to 5 like they used to be back in the day. So, and there's always people that go, "Well, I got a new shift," and or the kids are out of school or going back to school, I should say. So now I can't play as much or whatever it is. So eventually, everybody has to go about their business, and um, so we got down to a point where there weren't enough people because we don't like the idea of playing with just a handful, you know. Um, so we kind of put it on suspension. But there's some new interest. There's some new people that want to play, and so I was going to start it up and give you an idea of how it all works uh, with the domain play and the big epic deal. So it's real simple. Uh, you can choose to be an RPG type player, and in this, that means you're part of the Rebel Alliance. At least, I think we're going to start from where we left off, as opposed to rewind and start over. And we'd gotten about a year into it as far as the time in the storyline. It starts about 2 years prior to the events of the movie Rogue One and the original Star Wars release. Kind of talks about the formation of the rebellion. So at this point, the rebellion is found itself in a couple of fairly strong, heated battles. It's trying to make its first statement by actually liberating some people here and there, large amounts, like maybe an entire planet. So it's spending a lot of time with agents in Hut Space and other underground areas that have a lot of criminal activity. They're trying to make deals with smugglers and arms dealers and even drug runners to some extent in order to make money to fuel the rebellion war machine. They need to buy, ships and guns and stuff like that, and get more recruits. And the best way to get recruits is to liberate them from imperial planets or to go to certain areas and try to get people excited about fighting back. So those are some of the missions that you go on as a RPG player in this thing. If you want to play in the domain side of things, you can play as an Imperial, as a rebel, or as a neutral factor, something like being part of the Hutts gangs or a pirate or something of that nature. And everybody's got their own agenda to achieve. If you're the rebellion, you're trying to, save the galaxy. You're trying to liberate people and push back the Empire, try to subvert it. The Empire is trying to gain a more controlling dominance over the planets that are far away from Coruscant, the Outer Rim, as they call it. And the pirates and the Hutts and all other criminal organizations are out to make money off of that and everything else, and fight amongst themselves for control of territory and things like that. So you can control one of those or portions of one of those factions. And maybe you have a fleet or a ground command of troops or something like that. And you work with other players that are military types that handle diplomacy and resources and fighting the war by gaining territory and acquiring resources that allow you to build bases and new ships and recruit more troops and things like that. You don't have to be a rebel and be a role-playing individual. You can be role-playing and be one of the other two, but it's primarily about the rebellion. So it's a lot of fun once you get enough people to play. So, and I people seem to like the way I do Hut Space. It's not degenerate gross, but it's Hut Space is a little seedy, so sometimes you see gets a little bit Vegas, and people seem to enjoy it and have fun with it. But it's a prime example of domain play that's real easy to do. If you play the military side, the DM gives you all the information you need as far as what kind of resources you have to spend to buy new equipment and things like that. Every time you take territory, the territory may have something that contributes to your resource pool in order to allow you to build even more. You don't really have to calculate all that. I and my other people that DM will do that for you. and just give you the information. One of the best ways to do any of this type of play and avoid all the, well, it's too hard to do and there's too many rules and all that, is you got a DM for a reason. Let them carry the load. You really don't need to know that much other than to make the decisions and understand the consequences of those decisions by having a person brief you. But you don't really need to know every combat calculation or any of that sort of stuff. That just makes it seem like an intimidating and or tedious chore to have to do all of that. So I do it for you, and you just go, I want to build, for example, a Star Destroyer at this shipyard. Okay. You've got enough resources for that. Here's how much it costs out of the pool of how much, something like that. Here's how long it'll take to build or something. Game really doesn't go long enough to build a Star Destroyer itself, but it's just an example because most people know what that is, even if you don't play Star Wars. So, but think of it as a turn-based. There's a lot of computer games that do that sort of thing. Like if you're a computer gamer, maybe Space Empires. You ever seen one of those games or something like that? Get a bunch of ships or troops or both. Go find more territory to conquer. Exploit territory for resources and personnel. Rinse, repeat, that sort of thing. So, but again, anybody got any questions? Anybody? How did everybody left. Okay. Man, as soon as you start talking about fucking Star Wars, people just book. That sucks. Okay, then. Have a nice night. God damn.